gospel of our Lord Jesus Christ, according to Mark.
Glory to you, Lord Christ.
When Jesus had crossed again in the boat to the other side, a great crowd gathered around him, and he was by the sea. Then one of the leaders of the synagogue, named Jairus, came, and when he saw him, fell at his feet and begged him repeatedly, "My little daughter is at the point of death. Come and lay your hands on her, so that she may be made well and live." So he went with him. And a large crowd followed him and pressed in on him. Now there was a woman who had been suffering from hemorrhages for 12 years. She had endured much under many physicians and had spent all that she had. And she was no better, but rather grew worse. She had heard about Jesus and came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak, for she said, "If I but touch his clothes, I will be made well." Immediately, her hemorrhage stopped, and she felt in her body that she was healed of her disease. Immediately aware that power had gone forth from him, Jesus turned about in the crowd and said, "Who touched my clothes?" And his disciples said to him, "You see the crowd pressing in on you. How can you say, 'Who touched me?'" He looked all around to see who had done it. But the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came in fear and trembling, fell down before him and told him the whole truth. He said to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your disease." While he was still speaking, some people came from the leader's house to say, "Your daughter is dead. Why trouble the teacher any further?" But overhearing what they said, Jesus said to the leader of the synagogue, "Do not fear, only believe." He allowed no one to follow him except Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. When they came to the house of the leader of the synagogue, he saw a commotion, people weeping and wailing loudly. When he had entered, he said to them, "Why do you make a commotion and weep? The child is not dead, but sleeping." And they laughed at him. Then he put them all outside and took the child's father and mother and those who were with him and went in where the child was. He took her by the hand and he said to her, "Talitha kum," which means, "Little girl, get up." And immediately the little girl got up and began to walk about. She was 12 years of age. At this, they were overcome with amazement. He strictly ordered them that no one should know this, and told them to give her something to eat. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Christ.
Loving Spirit, you have chosen me to be. You have drawn me to your own will. You have set your Son on me.
Please be seated. Yesterday, I presented Katie Beaver for ordination to the priesthood. Joyful for me, joyful for us, joyful for Christ's whole church, the body of the faithful, and a real sign of the Holy Spirit active in the life of this community. What a joyous day! Now, some of you don't know that Katie Beaver and Dan Enders were the first two people I met at St. Andrew's while I was still working at another parish called St. Margaret's Annapolis. They were 17 at the time, and in the summer between their junior and senior high school years at Glenelg High School. I picked up Dan and Katie right out front here in the circle in a 15-passenger van in July of 2008 because Wes Hubenhorst, a dear, dear colleague of blessed memory, asked if I would have room in the van to take 2 kids from Glenwood. Now, about 2 weeks before that, the diocese had called and urged me to consider applying for a position at Glenwood as priest in charge, and I thought, where's Glenwood? And didn't think about it anymore until these 2 young people needed a ride, and I thought, well, I'll pick them up and I'll at least know where Glenwood is on the map. So I picked them up and they joined the youth that already were in the van from St. Margaret's, and we headed down to Wise County, Virginia, which is where we were doing our Appalachian ministry at the time. Meeting Katie and Dan helped me to discern that I wanted to interview for this priest in charge position, and well, here I am. Still in ministry with you all, which is one of the greatest gifts of my life. I feel like I need to thank Katie Beaver and Dan Enders a bit for that, right? When we went to Appalachia that year, we had a custom at that center of making our own bag lunches in the morning. After breakfast, everything would be getting cleaned up. We'd make our own bag lunches, put together what we liked on a sandwich, put it in a bag with our name on it, throw it into a nice cooler, so that as we worked throughout the heat of the day, we could take a nice lunch break in the shade, my favorite time, and have some fellowship. We would open up our sack lunches, we would feast on the fellowship of being together and whatever we put into our sack lunch. And there were some treats that we had for our lunches that I don't normally eat, right? But I'm on a mission trip doing God's work, so I would just enjoy it all. And one of those things was Cheetos. Cheetos. Throwing a little bag of Cheetos into my bag lunch meant that when we sat down in the shade to take a break and rest, and we would invite the family to join us for lunch. We'd pack some extra bag lunches. Sometimes the family would join us. I would take some Cheetos and shove them into my sandwich because that's what makes a sandwich so good, is something crunchy in the middle, right? It's the little things that can make us so happy, right? A little special ingredient. In life, there are those little things, those special ingredients that are a treat, that when we insert them into life's sandwich of events, make eating more enjoyable, more special. Friends, we know that God offers us so much. God offers us a very special ingredient, something we can invite into our lives, something that does not need to wait until a mission trip to be enjoyed, something that doesn't even need to really be opened because it's already opened for us and around us wherever we go. God offers us continuously the healing presence of Christ. We discover that ingredient everywhere around us. We discover it in our gospel text today. And it's presented in this text from Mark in this artful form of a story sandwich. A story sandwich. The first piece of bread in Mark's story sandwich is an interaction between Jesus and a very desperate man, a man who has some power in the community, who takes a great risk of faith. Jesus arrives in this town and a crowd immediately forms. That happens a lot in our Jesus stories. And as Jairus approaches Jesus, he falls to his knees and he takes an even bigger risk of being publicly humiliated. And yet, in total desperation, so worried about the well-being of his daughter, he takes the risk. He falls to his knees. He is a powerful man in the synagogue. And here comes this stranger, teacher, healer, Jesus, and he falls to his knees. He humiliates himself and takes all that on. He risks it because he's desperate, and he begs Jesus, my daughter is at death's door. Come with me and heal her. His risk pays off. Jesus follows Jairus home. In any crowd gathered around Jesus, or any crowd like us gathered here today, in any crowd, there are always people feeling somewhat desperate about something. Many of us long for healing from physical pain, from grief, from anxieties or past traumas, from addiction. We long for healing of troubled relationships. It's part of the human condition. Whenever we gather together, we know that some of us are hurting. And so in the midst of Jesus and Jairus making for Jairus' home, they are interrupted as something happens in the crowd. Here comes the story that gets sandwiched into the other story. In this crowd around Jesus, a woman who is really suffering. She has suffered a condition of hemorrhaging for 12 years. That makes her ritually unclean, unwelcome in the community. She probably shouldn't even be in the crowd of people, because if anybody touches her in the crowd, they become ritually unclean. She's a danger to this crowd, and yet she's in there. She is desperate for healing. She doesn't have that power position Jairus has, and so she's perhaps not quite courageous enough to turn and get in front of Jesus and say, "Hey, Jesus, I need you," and fall down to her knees and beg like Jairus does. But she's not letting this moment, this possibility get by her. She sneaks up behind Jesus and she says to herself, "If I can put just a finger on his robe, I can be made well. I'll be whole. I'll be healthy." And she sneaks up behind Jesus and she does it. She reaches for his robe. And that's as much courage as she can muster. So although she can't muster the courage to face Jesus face to face, she finds that courage in just a moment when Jesus spins around and looks for who did this? Who took some power from me? Which his disciples think that's a ridiculous question, right? I mean, there's so many people. So she falls down before him then. She tells him the whole story, the whole truth, all that's happened to her. And this takes a little while. Her story is long. And there's Jairus. What's he feeling? He's trying to get Jesus to his house, and yet he stands there as the healer teacher celebrates with this woman that she has been made whole. He calls her daughter. Did you catch that in the text? We don't know her name. Jesus says to her, "Daughter, you are so faithful that you dared to risk being out here in the crowd in your condition. You had the courage to hope. You had the courage and you had the knowledge of my power to reach out. And now look at you, you're healed and you're whole." He puts this big divine stamp of approval on her desperate act to reach out and hope for his healing power to heal her. So while Jesus and the woman are in this conversation and having this really powerful interaction, some people then sandwich into this sandwich story and interrupt the action. And they say to Jairus, they say, "Call it off. It's too late. She's gone. Don't bother the teacher anymore. It's a lost cause." I think Jesus hears the words "lost cause" and turns to Jairus and says, "With God, nothing is a lost cause. Let's go." And so he leads just a couple of them into this house. There's crowds outside weeping and wailing. Here comes the other slice of bread to finish our story sandwich in Mark. And he's saying to Jairus as they walk, "Don't listen to them. Only trust me." Those are good words for us. Don't listen to them. Only trust Jesus. And Jairus walks with Jesus back to the house, and he does an even more incredible thing. He trusts Jesus to raise his dead daughter. Now, it was a lot, risking humiliation, begging for Jesus to come and heal his sick daughter, But it is really different to then follow Jesus, expecting him to raise your dead daughter to life again. It's different, right? And he keeps following. He's going to look like a fool if it doesn't work. He risks everything. He believes that Jesus has that divine power, and he risks being exposed as a very foolish man. They get to the house, and just a few of them go inside, pushing their way past all that busybody activity that's going on in the house, people talking and wondering what could have been done. The parents should have done this. Maybe this happened. Jesus should have gotten here sooner. Why did he bother with that sick woman on the way? That's not fair. What about us? What about our family? Who knows what they're saying? And Jesus and his friends walk into all that, and he says to those people carrying trays of sandwiches and casseroles into the family, he says to all of them, "You don't know what you're talking about." Thanks be to God, they don't. They don't know what they're talking about. They do know that as good neighbors, they're there to be with that family. They know that. They know how to show up with casseroles and trays of sandwiches and to tend the family in their grief. They know it's too late. They know that the best thing for the family now is to be comforted, not given some silly false hope. Jesus sends them all out. Takes only the child's parents, the mother and the father, along with those three companions, his disciples, and enters into the room where she is, laying there dead. And he says, in the language that he would have been speaking all along, but it's only translated this way for us in a few places, he says in Aramaic, and we have it in the text, Talitha kum, little girl, get up. Just like that. Just like that. Talitha kum. She gets up from the bed and walks around. They are, of course, all beside themselves with joy, and Jesus tells them, she's really alive and you need to feed her. Get one of those sandwich trays and feed this child. He gets the house back into normal things, caring for the living. And like that, the other slice of bread wraps around the story combination. A story that beautifully features a woman who has been sick and ritually unclean for 12 years. She is broke and desperate. Pairs it with a young girl who is so sick that her family is so desperate for her healing, they chase Jesus down. She dies and is raised to life. In the midst of our desperation, our desperate moments, our deep longing for healing and comfort, we seek out Jesus and invite him home with us. We reach out from behind, maybe a little sneaky-like, to touch his robes. How do we explain that on that same day, in that same big crowd of people, there were hundreds of desperate people who were not healed, right? In that crowd, Jesus did not heal every person in the crowd. How do we make sense of the healing story when we have had faith in God's healing power, yet we have not been suddenly healed? When our loved ones have not been raised from the dead? How do we make sense of that? These healing mysteries that are written down for us in the Gospels are all about revealing to us the power of God to heal more than triaging whole communities and removing from them all of life's pain and suffering. Let's acknowledge that this little girl, Talitha kum, will one day again die. And that time, she will not be raised up in the way she was raised up to her former life. She'll be raised up in a new way, with Jesus forever, like we all will be. There are struggles and losses in our lives that will not be miraculously healed by the healer teacher who comes into our town one day, like in this sandwich story section of Mark. And yet we have this good news to carry with us. God sandwiches that powerful healing presence right into our own story. There are aspects of our suffering that can be healed, that can be transformed, There is a new life that can happen when we seek out Christ, when we reach out in hope for Christ's healing. The presence of God is already here with us. We don't have to open it. We don't have to necessarily go hunting for it. It's everywhere around us. God is present, and God is that healing power, that healing spirit. And so I asked myself this question this morning. Since God's healing presence is all around me and around you, I asked myself, do I dare? Do I risk it? Do I risk believing, hoping in the power of God to heal those places in my life that still hurt? God is always present with us. That healing power swirls around us constantly, and yet we get so busy with all the other things we sandwich into our lives that we don't always notice it. It's up to us to make a choice to notice it, even to consent to really be present to it, to reach out and touch it. I invite you today to add this very special and holy ingredient into your life, this special ingredient that will enhance the healing, enhance the new life you experience each day. Our psalmist said, "Joy comes in the morning." Each day we have a new opportunity to experience the healing, that special ingredient that God offers us. Each day we have the opportunity to consent to be present to that special ingredient that we can invite into our own lives, the healing presence of Christ. God offers it, and we've got to take it and sandwich it into our lives. Each day, consciously make room for it, get it in there. Each day, consciously and then repeatedly consent to be in God's healing presence. Sandwich in some space, some silent time to search out God's healing presence for you, to track God down, to stretch out a hand and dare to touch, to even risk believing, to believe in that hope that you know is still swirling in your souls.
Amen.